Hey, welcome back. Dr. Pedram, the Airbed monk, hanging out. Talking about the end of the world. Everyone thinks the world's been ending. I remember in 2012, the Mayan calendar ending. I had a bunch of hippie friends that were doing all sorts of like drumming circles, like calling in the end of the world or whatever it is. And turns out we're still here, but everyone still thinks we're about to crash into that thing, that cataclysmic event. And guys are buying bunkers and restoring missile silos and, having freeze-dried food that doesn't taste too great, but they're convinced it's coming. I have yet to meet an actual zombie. I know there's a lot of zombies walking around amongst us watching Kardashians and stuff, but the actual zombie thing I have yet to see, but I know that there's talk, right? And so my guest today, Peter Brannen, has a gorgeous book. It's called The Ends of the World. And he hit the road just kind of looking at the geology and really kind of the stories behind what these mass extinctions have been to date, and dug up some really interesting information that we're going to get into here, because you know what? If it's happened before, it could happen again. What are we looking at? So yeah, let's get into it. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so what drove you to get into this inquiry in the first place?
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with what you were kind of just saying now, that there is kind of this apocalyptic mood. And I thought it was really interesting that there's sort of this record in Earth history of times where the world, if it hasn't quite ended, it's gotten pretty close to it. And as we sort of look towards the future and our impact on this planet as a civilization, whether there's anything we can learn from these really cataclysmic episodes. And I was kind of shocked by some of the eerie similarities between some of these events and what we're doing today. So, for instance, we were talking just before we went on air about how some of these mass extinctions, including the worst, have actually been caused by gigantic emissions of CO2 that are driven by volcanoes. And so you see at some of the extinctions, some of the same things you see today with extreme global warming, ocean chemistry kind of getting screwed up. And we're not there yet, but I think the moral of the book and sort of the moral of Earth history is that maybe we shouldn't be messing with these big geological forces, because in the past, sometimes it gets pretty ugly. So
you said something that was really compelling in that, the rate at which we are putting carbon into the atmosphere is actually significantly higher than the rate that led to some of these mass extinctions with volcanoes or whatever that was. I'd love to get into that, because that's big. That's actually kind of dark.
Right, yeah. So the worst mass extinction of all time is this thing called the End-Permian, where 90% of life goes extinct. And it's thought to be caused by this gigantic area of volcanoes burning through all these coal, oil, and gas that's buried in Russia, and it all came out within a few thousand years. And it was a huge amount. It's more than we could ever burn. But when geologists have tried to constrain how long it took place over versus our rate of CO2 emissions over just a few centuries, it looks like we are burning through fossil fuels or injecting carbon into the air at 10 times the rate of the worst thing that's ever happened. And with certain things, with like ocean chemistry, so when you add carbon dioxide to the ocean, it acidifies it. And that's actually thought to be one of the main kill mechanisms in this mass extinction, this really old one. And we're acidifying the ocean, as far as we can tell, faster even than during that mass extinction. So if we keep it up the way we're doing now, things could get pretty ugly, I think most geologists would tell you.
And so one of these things, just to kind of bring in the perspective of scale here, is you get all these people like hunkering down in their bunkers with 5,000 rounds of ammo and like freeze-dried food, right? Thinking, okay, well, you know what, at least the cities will empty. There'll be more space for me. What does the world look like for how many hundreds, if not thousands, of years before life can start growing and restoring? I mean, this isn't pretty what we're talking about.
Yeah, so it's about 100 to 150,000 years for sort of all of our carbon to get washed out of the system. Most of it will be buried as limestone at the bottom of the ocean in the long run, but those are really long timescales for that to happen. But it's interesting you bring up people in bunkers and sort of civilization collapsing, because that's actually kind of a different subject. And I think you could start straining civilization beyond its sort of limits long before you ever get to, a biological mass extinction. Because, sometimes you hear skeptics say, oh, it's been warmer in the past, and life was happy. And they're right, life was happy. But you sort of map those really warm worlds onto today's world with, national borders and things. And I think that would really, maybe society can't keep up with that sort of change.
Right. And also just supply chain issues with feeding 7 billion people.
Oh, yeah.
That's probably a thing. Yeah, you know what I mean? It's just, right. There's a lot of hungry people. They're going to be really angry. Even every mad despot knows you give people food and water, or it's all over. Like there'll be blood in the streets.
Right. Yeah, and things like droughts are expected to become more intense, and lots of animals like crocodiles and savanna animals don't care about droughts. They adapt to it. But can human civilization adapt to this new sort of regime? I don't know. That's a different question, really.
Yeah, it's funny. My son has this Dinosaur book. And, I read to him every night, and he's 3 years old, right? And so it's one of the pages in there was about like the animals that we currently have that have survived since dinosaur days, and it's it's the crocodiles, it's the tortoise, just a couple fish, right? And what was that? I can't even remember, but just a few, like 5 things from 70 million years ago. Have somehow made it miraculously, and everything else has been long gone.
And and dinosaurs too. So birds are dinosaurs.
Right.
So that's
one of the funniest. That's one of the funniest things I've actually heard in a while. Is like the closest living ancestor to a dinosaur is the chicken, and we all eat chicken 2 times a day on average or something crazy, right? And so it's like there's dinosaurs everywhere.
Yeah, I actually have this passage in the book where I'm kind of done talking about that extinction, and then I'm on the highway and this truck goes by me filled with chickens in cages that are kind of looking at me with those reptile eyes, and I say something about how they're humiliated by the things that we're making these once glorious animals, these once glorious dinosaurs do. Now they're stuck in cages to feed us. So
totally, it's
kind of yeah.
What kind of protein would you like with that?
yeah, right.
So you said there was big 5 major mass extinctions. There was this big kind of carbon event. What were the other 4?
So another motivation for writing the book is that these events are pretty obscure for the most part. So the most recent one was the dinosaur mass extinction, and that's also the most well-known one just because everyone loves dinosaurs and they're wiped out in this spectacular sort of fashion. But 200 million years before, or not, that was 66 million years ago. 200 million years ago, there was this event called the End-Triassic mass extinction. And that, you have a world where dinosaurs had just come onto the scene, but they were mostly small and sort of stayed out of the way. And the world was ruled by these crocodile relatives that were these big, athletic reptiles that sound similar to dinosaurs, but they're actually a slightly different lineage. And when they get wiped out, dinosaurs quickly explode and become giant and take over the planet, really. And you also have coral reefs go almost completely extinct in that extinction. And it's another one of these giant volcanoes that just shoots carbon dioxide into the air and makes it really unpleasant for life.
Do we know how long that? Because when I think volcano, I think Mount St. Helens, right? It's just like boom, wow, look at that, it's so newsworthy,
right?
And then it's over. Are we talking about like 1,000 years of eruptions? That's 200 million years ago. Who the hell knows? But maybe the sedimentation shows it, right?
Yeah. No, so it's actually a totally different scale of eruption than anything that we can. There's no modern analog to it. It's totally outrageous, and it only happens every 100 million years or so. But what it is a giant area of a continent will just get flooded with lava, so much so that in one of them, you had enough lava erupt that it would have covered the lower 48 states a kilometer deep in lava. So like people talk about Yellowstone. If Yellowstone went off, it would cover a few states and a few inches of ash. So this is just like totally different scale than even that.
Wow.
And it's not the lava that kills things. It's actually the volcanic gases that most geologists would say does it. But you can see that extinction. You can see the lava from the End-Triassic extinction in the Palisades across from New York City, these giant cliffs that are basically made out of magma from that eruption, and you can find it there. You can find it in Brazil, Nova Scotia, Morocco. So it really spans the world around at this time.
Wow.
That extinction.
A kilometer deep, the lower 48 states. I mean, the scale of, I mean, that's like Earth rupturing like a main artery or something, right? Like that is a huge lava flow.
Right. Yeah. It's totally preposterous.
And that's something. I mean, do we have any predictive models to show, hey, this thing might be coming, or is that just so outside of, like the realm of what we know?
I think because they're so rare that we don't really have to worry about one happening anytime soon. So, for instance, when that one happened, it was because Pangea was breaking apart, and maybe the crust was a little thinner. So it would have been easier for one of these things to come up through it. And nothing like that's happening today. So we don't have to worry about Earth killing us, but the fact that we're doing sort of the same thing as these eruptions, we are the volcano that we need to, worry about, I think.
Eating the dinosaurs and burning them in our SUVs.
Right.
That's amazing. Return of the dinosaurs. Okay, and just in context, with the other three, do we know what they were? Were they all kind of volcanic? Was it ice age? Like what else happened?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the one before that was 252 million years ago. It was the one we were talking about before, which was the worst one ever, the End-Permian. Again, most life in the seas goes extinct, and on land you have this weird group of half reptile, half mammal creatures that seem like they disappear. Trees basically disappear from the fossil record for 10 million years after it. Insects suffer their only major mass extinction during it. This is the worst mass extinction ever. And this is the one caused by the volcano in Siberia that would have been a kilometer deep over the United States. Like that was the worst one. And then the two before it happened entirely in the oceans because life hadn't really come onto land yet. And those might be ice ages. It's been theorized, and they might be ice ages because the same way that we worry about CO2 going up too quickly, if it goes down too quickly, the planet cools off. And so there have been a few ways that it's been proposed that maybe life and tectonics might have drawn down CO2 and caused these glaciations that killed a lot of life on Earth.
Interesting. And so the theory there, which is really kind of apropos for where we're at now, of kind of mass withdrawal of CO2 from the environment. So when you say life, I mean, tectonics is interesting because, I don't even know if I understand how that would work, but life is like, where there's like, 1,000-foot trees all over covering all the land that started becoming a carbon sink. Like, what does that even look like?
Well, that's actually, that's a fantastic guess because that's almost what happened. 380 million years ago, there was almost no vegetation on the surface of the planet whatsoever. And then 10 million years later, you have forests. And all of a sudden, you have this gigantic carbon sink that's sucking CO2 out of the air like crazy, which we think of trees as sort of these great things for life, and it's like the most natural thing in the world. But when they first showed up on the planet, it seems like it was really disruptive. So they might be responsible for this ice age 359 million years ago that resulted in a mass extinction. That's
interesting. And then you get a couple more iterations where then you get these little chicken-sized dinosaurs that then have the place to themselves, and they end up being like two buses long and then eating trees for breakfast. And so you have a kind of a sort of checks and balances system between the trees and the things that eat the trees.
Right. As soon as the trees show up, you start to see fish sort of wading onto land, testing it out to see if it's a place they would want to spend any time. So this is right at the transition when our ancestors were kind of stopping being fish and starting to adapt to life on land.
So just how the hell does someone find this? Like, so, when someone's saying, okay, let's say the first two are in the ocean, like, I don't even know how to like look at that, but like, let's say the one you're talking about with the Palisades outside of New York, you don't carbon date rock. Like, did they find these half mammal, half dinosaur creature fossils and identify them that late in the game or early in the game?
So there's a lot of ways of dating rocks. You're right. For carbon dating only works for a few thousand years, and then it's totally useless. But you can date. You can date these things called zircons, which contain. It's called radioisotope dating. So you see how much lead versus uranium is in a little crystal, and if you're a brilliant geoscientist, you can reconstruct how old the rock that you're looking at is. You can also look at these tiny fossils that kind of tell you where you are in time. So it can be pollen or little tiny pieces of plankton, and there's a lot more of those than big things like dinosaurs. So it's a lot easier to get a handle of where you are in time if you look at what the tiny life is like. So yeah, you can really finely scale, date rock, and then you can see there are all these big crocodile-like animals, and then the next layer up, there's none, and there's big dinosaurs. So
amazing.
Something, yeah.
So we're talking about, the world that we live in is so dramatically different since like the 1940s, right? So we're talking 60, 70, 80 years of human history, of Earth history with humans on it, versus 10 million here, 100 million there. I mean, we're talking about the scale is just ridiculous. It's hard to grasp.
Yeah, it is, but at the same time, what we're doing has been both incredibly quick, but also geologically important. If you're a geologist 100 years or 100 million years from now, and you find a layer of rock where human civilization was, you might notice that the coral reefs started dying off. So that's a signal that will be around for these, even though it's happening so quickly, it's going to be something that we leave in the rocks for, functionally eternity. So.
Yep. So, it sounds like we are headed for a pretty ugly event that is probably going to lead to something that we've seen 5 times, unless we start really thinking about the volume and the frequency of kind of release of this carbon into our atmosphere.
Yeah. So far in human history, all the damage we've done has basically been from direct interference. So it's been hunting and, habitat fragmentation, cutting off migration routes, and pollution. And so far, the carbon part of it hasn't really hit yet. So for one thing, we need to relax all the just direct harm that we're doing to the environment. And there's ways to do that. You can set aside gigantic marine protected areas, which people are starting to do, and say that rainforests are off limits. So that's one part of it. But yeah, going forward, we need to get a handle of our energy system, because if you project anything like a century or two forward, anything not even close to geological time, us keeping up the way we're doing now, then yeah, we will start finding that things might be going as wrong as they have in these incredibly rare moments in Earth history.
When you talk about a mass extinction, it's not like boom, everyone's dead. But like if you look back at this history, like how is there like a phase out? Like it's like, oh, it took 1,000 years and all of a sudden they were all gone. Like what does that look like?
Well, we know they're within a few tens of thousands of years, but that's only because we can only see so finely in the fossil record. So they might have been a lot quicker than that. And it does look like the background conditions before, disaster strikes is that the environment's pretty stressed and things are kind of going wrong, but kind of sort of bumping along. And then for whatever reason, suddenly the majority of life on Earth goes extinct. And so I've heard that this is compared, paleontologists I talked to at the Smithsonian compared it to how power grids fail. And the thing about power grids failing is we have no idea why power grids fail. It just turns out that 1 or 2 little nodes gets knocked out, and it's just enough to destabilize the whole thing, and suddenly the whole eastern seaboard is dark. So it might be that, we're stressing the environment a lot, we're kind of knocking out a couple animals here and there, and before we even realize that anything that bad has happened, we've knocked out enough nodes of the ecosystem that the whole thing could come down collapsing pretty quickly. So to me, that's the most frightening prospect, that we might be edging up to this thing without really realizing that we're doing it.
There's some staggering statistic about the number of species that go extinct every year currently. And the fallout of that, who the hell knows, right? But it's definitely impacting ecosystems. what ecosystems are intact. And then there's the kind of the good news stories, right? Where, everyone's heard of this kind of like the wolves being reintroduced into Yellowstone.
Right.
And someone just did a really nice video of that, of how it started keeping certain animals away, then certain plants started coming back, and then because the beavers showed up, then the rivers kind of started to kind of not jump their banks or whatever it was.
Right.
And it was just this kind of really interesting reverse breakdown story that came from reintroducing things that we didn't know we were messing up.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's the encouraging thing too, is that life is really resilient. So if we ever just decided to slow down, I think you'd see a big recovery. So for instance, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, you weren't supposed to eat swordfish because swordfish were about to go extinct. Mm-hmm. You stop doing that. Swordfish have thousands of kids, they broadcast spawn thousands of eggs, and you give it a few decades and, swordfish are plentiful again in the ocean. Yep. If we just stopped, like you see in Yellowstone, you can have incredible, devastation. All of a sudden life comes back pretty quickly. So I think that's the encouraging thing, is that we don't have to go down this road, and if we do ever get a handle of what we're doing, then it could bounce back pretty quickly.
So here's the part that kind of just breaks my mind, and it bothers me for obvious reasons, is, okay, so you're down at the Smithsonian, you're talking to all these smart people about this, and everyone's like, oh yeah, this happened, and this is what's happening, and here's the data.
Yeah.
Yet the political system and, just these conversations happening around, going back to, extracting oil or coal and kind of going into oil reserves and our strategic reserves seems so fundamentally regressive. I want to speak to this whole notion that, people are talking about, like, well, the science isn't clear, the climate science isn't clear. Like you're a journalist who's been traveling and talking to the best of the best. I mean,
right.
Are these people crackpots, or are these people the best that we got? You know what I mean? Like, it's so hard with this fake news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I find it incredibly depressing, because you go to any conference, a geology conference, a climate conference, anything, and the conversation has moved on from where the political conversation is, I don't know, 50 years ago, maybe. I mean, we've known since the 1860s that carbon dioxide causes global warming. That's when it was discovered it was a greenhouse gas. And in the 1890s, this Swedish guy did a calculation that if you doubled CO2, it would get 4 degrees warmer, which is, about the same as what our supercomputers tell us. So carbon dioxide is a heat trapping gas. It's impossible. That's basic physics, and it's impossible to add carbon dioxide to a system and not have that system get warmer. It's just physically impossible. There's some New York Times op-ed in the 19-teens, I think, about how we had to stop digging up coal because it would cause global warming. So yeah, I don't know what the solution is, but people are dramatically misinformed on this subject, and I think it's really dispiriting that it's become a political topic, because there should be the science that we agree on, and then there are political solutions to what we should do about it. Right. So you could have free market solutions to slowing carbon dioxide release, put a price on carbon, and then, free market will sort of figure it out. Or you could have state-driven solutions where, you order whatever. I don't know how that would work, but
it's hard, because the political system has been usurped by financial interests, and so, brought to you by
right.
ExxonMobil, we now have this policy.
Right.
And
yeah.
so for me, it's like, short of saying I've given up on political solutions, I'm very interested in market-driven solutions.
Yeah.
There's a company called Guayaquil, which I'm very fond of, and it's in our prosperity movie, which, every time you buy a bottle of their shade-grown mate, what you're doing is you're helping restore and basically grow back rainforest.
Right.
So, a market-driven solution to say, okay, well, let's increase the carbon sink at least, and let's try to move towards more solar. What other solutions did you find, if any, out there when you were interviewing the kind of the top minds in the space?
Well, my book doesn't really cover that. I kind of just lay out like what the context of this all is. But I think something that's kind of uncomfortable for a lot of people on, I don't know, traditionally who've been allied with the left to hear, is that I think nuclear is going to have to be a part of any energy portfolio that we have going forward. It's a carbon-free and sort of limitless resource. It's expensive, and Um, it's it's kind of too expensive right now, but I think that has to be a part of it. It's got to be sort of all hands on deck.
Okay, so nuclear has its own problems, as witnessed by Fukushima, and you know,
Right.
now the political will has kind of shifted, especially in Germany and
Right.
some of these markets,
Yeah.
to say forget it, we're out.
Right.
But it is, you know, it gives radioactive isotopes. I mean, it still has a wake that you know isn't clean, but at least it isn't going to suffocate the planet and lead to mass extinction if disposed of correctly, right?
Right, yeah. And actually, there's more when you burn coal, you shoot radioactive uranium up into the air. So there's way more radiation coming from coal plants than there is from nuclear plants. And yeah.
Coal's an interesting one, though, right? Like even like the whole market has moved away from coal. Like it's just, you know,
Yeah.
we're talking about coal, but coal's not even a thing anymore. But it's become this kind of polarizing event, you know, in the last election, and people, you know, are still talking about something that is we've kind of moved on, from what I understand.
Yeah, it's funny that it has the place it does in culture. Like I think there was some stat that there are more yoga teachers in the country than there are coal miners, and you don't hear about presidential candidates sort of like rallying their base by saying we need to protect yoga teaching jobs. So
Yeah. Well, that'll be the day.
yeah, right.
That's great. So, you know, in your journey and in your analysis, and you know, I mean, you're obviously looking at some depressing stuff. Where's the silver lining? Like, what is it, you know, that we can learn from the end of the world that we need to look at now?
I think I kind of went into this topic with sort of a ecological gloom and doom outlook. I thought we might, you know, sort of end the world ourselves. And I don't know if this is optimism because it's such a long time scale, but in 10 million years, the Earth is going to be fine no matter what we do. Even the worst mass extinctions, the Earth endures, and you have these new wonderful animals and ecosystems. And I think if we're stupid, sure, we'll disappear. But in the long run, the Earth will bounce back and be just as resilient and wonderful as it is today. So I don't know if that's optimistic, but to me it is, I guess.
Well, if you're the Earth, it is.
Yeah, right, right.
But if you're a human, you got some thinking to do.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, the book is called The Ends of the World by Peter Brannen. Like I said, great cover, really just well done, gorgeous looking book. And yeah, I mean, look, these solutions aren't easy, but these aren't easy times. So now it's time to really think about, you know, what our legacy is going to be, and whether or not we're going to let, you know, this industry-driven narrative drive us to extinction, or whether we're going to fight for our children and maybe hang out on the Earth a little longer.
That would be great. I think if we survive the next few decades, then humanity really could have some great things in store. But it all depends on how stupid we are in the next, you know, few decades. It really is an interesting time to be alive.
Yep. And one of the things I want to emphasize here before we cut out, and we're just out of time, but I really want to drive this point home, is everyone's like, yeah, we're so stupid. We, you know, when are they going to get it together, right? And collectively, we, right? And so
Yeah.
it's every little micro decision each of us makes that helps either, you know, it feeds the wrong wolf, if you will. And so every single one of us has a role to play in this. And so, you know, it becomes, every drop will lead to, you know, a river that becomes an ocean and all that. And so, you know, I want to make sure, if you're listening or watching this, that you understand that this isn't about, like, you know, why don't they do something? What are you going to do is the better question. And what are you going to do starting today? And what are you going to continue to do to be a part of the solution and manifest this as you know, a reliable way of us kind of working together to do this? Don't wait for someone to fix the world. It's just not going to work that way, right? So let me know what you think. Check out the book, and this conversation will continue because it's one of the most important conversations we can ever have, right? It's about the ongoing longevity of our species. So, hey, Peter, thanks so much for doing the work that you do, and good luck out there with the book and all that. And you know, as you got new stuff coming, send it our way. I'm interested in this.
Great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.